Hello everyone. In this video we will discuss on how to create a dual boot hard drive with Windows and Linux on it. So for Windows I'll be using a Windows 10 flavor, and for Linux I'll be using Linux Mint. So in order that I can record everything, I will be using a virtual box, and I have created a virtual machine with the following configurations. It has a 4 GB of RAM, 2 cores of processor, and the boot order that I have kept is as such. The optical drive would be optical drive is on the priority first and hard disk is second, so that when I put a bootable disk in the CD or DVD ROM, it would be checked accordingly. So in your case you can change that settings in your BIOS. So this page reflects the BIOS settings, and in my case I'll just insert the ISO file in the VirtualBox. So the hard drive that I have created is around 50 GB, since it's just a test environment. In your case it can be 500 GB or 1 TB or 2 TB, whatever. So once you have these ISO files, you have to create a bootable image either on a DVD or a USB stick. Once you have that, you have to connect that to your laptop or desktop. In my case, I'll just select these ISO files and boot the VM accordingly. So first we will do this with Windows and then Linux. This order is important. So I have selected the Windows ISO and I will now start the VM. So you can put your Windows DVD or the USB stick that you have created bootable with Windows image on it, and then start your PC or laptop. The setup is usual. Next, install now. The main part would be creating number of partitions on a hard disk. We'll have a look at it right now. Well, since it is on a virtual machine, it might be a little slower. Okay, so now that we have the license agreement, click on accept. On this screen, we will not do a regular installation. Instead, we will do a custom Windows installation. Okay, when we do that, we will be brought up to this screen with the list of disks. In my case, it is a 50 GB of disk that I have created. In your case, it would be your physical hard drive of your laptop or desktop, which can be 500 GB or 1 TB, whatever. So first we will select that disk, create a partition, and let's say I want to install Windows with a partition of 20 GB. So 20 GB in terms of MB is 20480. Now when I create this partition, it gives me a message. It says that to ensure that all Windows features work correctly, Windows might create additional partitions for system files, which is okay. Now what that means is it will create a system reserved partition, this one right here. Now the catch here is most of us use an MBR partition table of hard disks. What is an MBR? MBR is master boot record. And the limitation of this kind of partition table on a hard disk is that we can only create 4 number of primary partitions on an MBR disk. When I created a 20 GB of partition for Windows installation, it created a system reserved partition. Now both these partitions are primary partitions. So it is important that we leave this unallocated space as it is. If we go ahead and create more number of partitions right now, Windows will keep on creating primary partitions itself. We don't want that as of now. Just select the partition that you want Windows to be installed on and click on Next. It is very important that we do not create any more partitions at this page. Just create the partition that you want Windows to be installed on, which would be your C drive inside the Windows environment. System reserved you won't be able to see, but it would be created at the backend. So these two are already primary partitions. Do not create any more number of partitions. Just select the primary partition that you want Windows to be installed on and click on Next. Now this page will take some time to install, so to copy the files. I won't complete this installation. The reason is I don't want to use Windows 10 on a virtual machine, so I won't complete this installation. But in your case, you have to finish this installation, restart your machine, boot into Windows, and verify that everything is working fine. Once you have done that, shut the machine down and then continue with the Linux installation, which I would be doing in some time. So I will pause the recording as of now. I will let this files get copied, but I won't complete the installation, and then we will resume with the Linux installation. But in your case, let this complete, finish the installation, restart your laptop or desktop, boot into Windows, check and verify that everything is working fine with the Windows, and then do a shutdown, and then we will proceed with the Linux installation. So we'll catch once the installation is completed. Alright guys, now that the setup for Windows is almost complete, it would be finishing the installation and restarting, but I won't let this complete, so I'll power off the machine. In your case, don't do that. Let the setup complete, let it restart, let it finish the setup, boot into Windows, and once you verify that Windows has installed completely, only then go ahead and shut down the machine and do what I'm doing right now. So remove the DVD of Windows and insert the DVD for Linux Mint or the pen drive for Linux Mint. Once you do that, start your machine. Alright, so sorry for the glitch. Once you insert the Linux Mint, it would boot into something called Live CD, which is as good as a fully operated Linux Mint, but you can go ahead and use the apps such as Firefox Terminal, or you can view your files, but I'm just going to start the installation of Linux Mint so that we can proceed with the installation. Now it was giving us the warning that since it is virtual, it might be a little slow, which is what we are seeing. So if you are using an Ubuntu flavor or Linux Mint, in my case, both the installation are same, the steps and the graphical user interface are exactly the same, so this can work for Ubuntu as well. So just select the language, keyboard layout, continue. Even if you're installing some other flavor of Linux, it is still more or less the same, so it doesn't matter. So I am going to skip the installation of third-party software. If you want, you can Let's check that, but this would need an internet connection. Alright, on this page it says that install Linux Mint alongside Windows 10 because it has detected Windows 10 installation that we did. But we won't do that. We won't erase Windows 10 and install Linux Mint because we want dual boot. So we'll do something else. You can do this as well. What it would do is it won't let you create partitions. It would create automatically. But as we want to create that, we would do something else and we will create partitions manually. So when we do that, it will give us the page with the hard disk and the number of partitions that it has and the free space that we can play with. So as we saw on the Windows installation, we created this 20 GB of partition, primary partition for installation of Windows, and it created a system reserved partition where it kept the Windows 10 boot files. What we would like to do is we would click on free space and create a partition for Linux installation. So I'll select the free space and click on the plus icon here. It will give us the option of creating the primary partition for Linux installation. In my case, I will select it as 10240. Sorry, 10240. That is around 10 GB. In your case, you can select accordingly, but since it is a test environment and I have only 50 GB of hard drive to play with, so I'll just create a 10 GB for Linux installation. The partition can be ext4, xfs or anything like ext3, but I'll leave it to ext4, and the mount point I'll select as the root partition. Now it is important that you create a primary partition for OS, any operating system installation. Now there is a debate going on that we can install operating system on logical partitions as well, but it is recommended that we go with primary. So I'll create a primary and click on OK. Now as I said before that an MBR disk, that is a master boot record disk, will only allow us to create 4 primary partitions. The maximum number of primary partitions for an MBR disk is 4. We have already created 3 number of primary partitions and the 4th one is free. Now we can create 4 primary partitions or 3 primary partitions and 1 extended partition. The extended partition can have multiple logical partitions. So if we go ahead and create another primary partition, let's see what happens. So along with a Linux partition for installation, we need something called a swap area. What is a swap area? Swap area is a reserved space in a hard drive, or even we can create a swap file. Now Linux uses swap area when it runs out of RAM, or it can also use this swap area when we hibernate our system. So when the Linux system is hibernated, the data from RAM goes to swap, and when we bring back the system, the data from swap comes back to RAM. So which is why the space for swap, the size of swap should be more or less equal to the physical RAM of your machine. So in my case the RAM is 4 GB, so I can give a swap partition of 4 GB, but it is recommended that you give a little more than your RAM. So I'll go ahead with 5 GB. Now if I select swap partition as a primary partition, let's see what happens. So the file system would be swap area. We don't need a mount point for swap. So 5 GB of primary. Now we saw that we already had 3 primary partitions and we created 1 more primary, which is the 4th primary partition. Let's see what happens. Okay, the remaining hard disk space has gone unusable. The whatever 16 or 17 GB of space is unusable now. We cannot use it because we already exceeded the number of partitions, number of primary partitions for an MBR disk. This is an MBR disk, master boot record. So what I'll do is I'll remove this swap partition. Now swap partition doesn't need to be primary. As I said, it is a reserved space in hard drive. It just needs to store data temporarily. So it doesn't need to be a primary partition. In some cases, a swap file is used. So it's just a reserved space. It need not be primary. So I'll go ahead with 5 GB of logical and a swap area. Okay. Now when I do that, it will create the swap area as 5 GB of logical partition, and the remaining would still be usable as a free space. Now you can go ahead and play with this free space right here. You can create FAT32 or FAT16 file system partitions, which would be usable in Windows as well. If you are more familiar with Windows, go ahead and create the remaining partitions in the Windows environment using the disk management. That is fine as well. I'll leave that to you, however you want to create. But if you are creating from here, do not create more ext4 partitions or xfs partitions. If you want to use this partition as in Windows environment as well, either create a FAT32 partition or create partitions in Windows itself, so that Linux can view those partitions also. Okay, so just select the ext4 which we created for Linux installation and then click on install now. So it will create the so it just says that it will create these two partitions and it will install Linux on this ext4 partition. Just continue. Some information of time zone, username, just give whatever you want. It is okay if it is a weak password, it's my test environment. Make sure you give appropriate passwords and everything. Okay, so this installation will also take some time, so I will skip this installation. I won't skip the installation, I will pause the recording and we will resume once the installation is completed. So I want to show you the bootloader for Linux, which is called GRUB. It's abbreviation for Grand Unified Bootloader, GRUB. So once this setup is completed, Linux Mint will use the GRUB to list the operating systems that are present in the machine, from where we can select and boot into the respective operating systems. So I'll skip the recording here and we'll resume once it is completed. So see you there. Alright, so now that the installation of Linux is completed, it is telling us that the installation is finished. You can continue testing Linux Mint now, but until you restart your changes and documents. We can either continue using the live CD or we can restart and use the actual installed version of Linux. So as I said, this is a live CD. We can continue testing. That is what it is telling us now. So I'll just click on restart. It says to remove the installation medium and press enter. That's fine. here. This is what I wanted to show. So this is something called GRUB, Grand Unified Bootloader. It has the first option as Linux Mint, which is our installed operating system for Linux Mint, and this one here is Linux Mint that we installed. These three are advanced options for Linux Mint that would be used when, let's say, if we forget the root password and we are unable to log in. This is when these three options would be used. And the last one is our Windows 10, which we have. So we can select accordingly by up or down arrow keys and boot into our respective operating system. So most of the cases we would either go to the first option, which is Linux Mint, or the last option, which is Windows 10. So let's just do that. I think that is it for the installation of dual boot. It will now boot into Linux and you can use the operating system as you want, or you can go to Windows and use the Windows environment as you want. The reason I showed this is because Linux Mint is a very good operating system for reasons such as it is free, it is open source, and it is a good alternative for Windows. What we do in most cases is, Windows is not free. Windows 10, Windows 7 that we use, they are not free as such. They are proprietary softwares from Microsoft. But most of us, what we do is we don't buy a licensed version for our personal use. Instead, we download a pirated copy of Windows operating system and use them on our laptops, which is not good for reasons such as it is illegal in first place, and secondly, even if we are sure, or if you want to live a thug life and say that I'll be using a pirated version, I don't care. The catch here is the copy of Windows that you're using is not original. They are redistributed from someone else, which might be, how can I put, the operating system can have a backdoor. The source code has been altered. The so-called pre-cracked version or unlimited version of your Windows has been altered, and you cannot be sure that it is a clean operating system. So, which is why Linux Mint or Ubuntu, these are free and open source softwares. So when a free alternative is available, why use a pirated one? So stay out of trouble, use Linux, it is good. So alright, so I can understand that going out of Windows might be difficult at once, which is why I made this video, so that you can continue using your Windows as well and try to learn Linux as well alongside. So thank you for viewing. I hope this was helpful, and alright then, see you soon in next video.